Should we just take a moment of silence to gather ourselves, to be present to our deeper selves, present to each other, and present to the Spirit of God, Spirit of Christ, Spirit of wisdom. Good. So what I'd like to do is offer a number of things. A picture of the community, which some of you know very well, some of you may be more new to. And that picture will contain something of the history, and as well as the way it has grown over the years, where it is now, and of course where it may be going, but is what we're about this week, but also about the essential teaching, which is at the heart of the birth of the community and its growth. And then I'd like to put in a little bit on how we can see that in terms of our own personal practice of that teaching, as we look at the journey of meditation that we make. So, what are we? You could say we're a global spiritual community united in the practice of meditation in the Christian tradition. We talked for a long time, I think maybe here in New Harmony 30 years ago, about what is a member of this community. We didn't want it to become an institution. So what is a member of the community? So the member of the community, according to the Constitution, is somebody who meditates in the tradition of meditation as passed on by John Main in the Christian tradition. People sometimes call it the John Main tradition. He would wince when if he heard that, because it's a tradition that he received and he passed on, of course, and we are passing on. And we're passing it on in a certain spirit of unity. So there's something very specific about it, at the same time as it is universal. And the deeper you go into the particular, the more you discover the universal. To see the world in a grain of sand, eternity in an hour. So if we really focus and go into the particular or into the present moment, we break out into the universe, into universal unity. Like in the Upanishads, where it says there is a tiny space in the heart, smaller than the size of your thumbnail. But in that tiny space, there are the moon and the suns and the galaxies and the vast universe. Christ in you. So, serving the unity of all, as we practice and share this tradition and live in the community that it creates. It was one of John Main's great insights, I think, for the church and for the world today. Meditation creates community. Creates in the sense of bringing alive this community, this communion is already there in us, but we need to wake it up, activate it. Otherwise, we remain locked in division and in our own little worlds. So over the last 40 years or more, I've seen this happen. I haven't just made it happen. I've been carried along by the wave and the tides of the Spirit. But I can definitely attest to the truth of that insight. So the meditators meditating within or with the community are spread now around at least 100 countries. There are 67 national communities, which means they have a national coordinator. Depending on their size, they'll have a council and they'll have some kind of organization for the community that has come into being through the practice, through the meditation groups. We also have an international center, a retreat center at Bonneau. If you were here at lunchtime yesterday, you'd have seen them having dinner last night for the Feast of St. Benedict. And that center is the home of the world community. So everyone, guests, members, meditators, welcome to come and stay there, experience the life of a community that lives around this rhythm based in the spirit of Benedict, this rhythm of prayer and work and study and hospitality and service. And we also have retreats and so on. So people are welcome to that. But although Bonneau is a physical place, very beautiful physical place, we are essentially a monastery without walls. The meditators, the meditation groups, the national communities around the world form this monastery without walls. And within that, there is a group of oblates, lay people, or some priests, some religious, or at least priests, who follow the spirit of the rule of St. Benedict in their lives. After they've been meditating for some time, they find in that rule a way of shaping their spirituality and shaping their direction in life. The Oblate community is a very precious part of the community, but is just ordinary guys and girls, really. It's just ordinary meditators who take part in the the regular conferences of the Oblates around the world, organized by the Abbot Primate in Rome. The motto of or the logo of the community are two doves sitting on a chalice. One is sort of sipping from the chalice, and the other is looking away. And this is a very ancient symbol. You find it in the Upanishads. There is a tree, and on this tree there are two sweet friends. One eats the fruit thereof, the other looks on in silence. So they are the symbols of Martha and Mary in the Christian tradition, of contemplation and action. Two sweet friends. And the essence, of course, of this path, the journey we're on, and the communities helping people to be on it, is that we integrate and marry, harmonize the contemplative and active life that we see in Martha and Mary, in St. Peter and St. John, but we'll see also in Jesus himself, the model of an integrated human being. So that's the community. And John Main, who died in 1982, didn't live in that lifetime anyway to see it grow as it has. But I think he knew that the seed that was being planted by him and through him was going to grow. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about him and how his own journey was part of this work of the Spirit that has brought us here to New Harmony again, and which inspires many people on their journey. John Main came from an Irish family with their roots in Ballinskelligs, County Kerry. He was born in London in 1926, and he was just old enough to serve in the army at the end of the war. And he was served in the Royal Corps of Signals. And their job was to detect the enemy radio bases after the invasion of Europe after D-Day. So it was quite dangerous work, and he was blown up at one point. But his work was made much easier with the invention of the quartz crystal. Quartz crystal allowed a much more accurate identification of where these signals were coming from. And many years later, shortly before he died, he remembered this, and he compared the quartz crystal to the mantra. That as we say the mantra, we are, as he said, putting ourselves on the wavelength of the mind of Christ, and doing that finely, with the fine attention that we bring to meditation. It's just an example of how he inherited and recognized an ancient tradition, but wanted to communicate it in a contemporary way. And he knew, as I'll explain in a moment, he knew exactly why this was of such necessity for the church and for the world. So it had to be represented, and it had to be presented in a way that could be picked up by people like us. So after the war, actually, he joined a religious community for a short time. The vocation sort of awoke then, but he didn't stay with that community. And he went and studied law at Trinity College in Dublin. And then he studied Chinese at the Oriental School, the London School of Oriental Studies. And often remembered the sign over the door of the university, "Knowledge is power." And it made him think even then, what kind of knowledge and what kind of power are we talking about? So he joined the British Foreign Service and was sent to Malaya, as it then was, which was going through a lot of trouble. The British were still in power, which was partly why they were in trouble. And so he entered into a very place of violence and conflict. And one day he was on the Governor General's staff, and one day he was asked by the Governor General to go and visit a monk, an Indian monk called Swami Satyananda, who had been made a Justice of the Peace by the British for his work for peace. Malaya is a very racially diverse country with many Indians, and he had started a center called the Pure Life Society, focused on the building of understanding and unity among people of different faiths, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Christians in particular. And at the same time, he had an orphanage in which the children who had been orphaned by the war were brought up, educated and cared for, and brought up in their own faith. So he was quite a visionary and inspiring person. And John Mayne was asked to go to see him and thank him for his good work and tell him that the Queen was very happy with him and so on. But as he got into conversation, he realized he was in the presence not only of a very good man and a man who could do things that expressed peace and unity, but a man who had this peace and unity within himself, a man of the Spirit. And so John Mayne was a very religious person, so they started, in fact, the Swami said to him, "Are you a religious man, Mr. Mayne?" And he said, "Yes." He said, I'm Christian, I'm Catholic. And he said, "I take it very seriously." And so they started, and then he said, "Do you pray?" And he said, "Yes, I pray." He He said, Mass is very important to me. I pray, I read scriptures, and so on. And the monk listened to this, and the conversation continued, and he said, in our way of prayer, we pray in different ways, but we also pray in what we call meditation. And this led to a deeper level of conversation, and he described meditation as a way in which we move from the mind to the heart, leaving thoughts behind. And he described practice. Remember, he was a very practical person. He described a practice of taking a single word or phrase and repeating this continuously in the heart during the time of the meditation, leaving aside your thoughts, and doing this on a regular basis. So this resonated with Father John, or Douglas Main, as he was, first because he could, and in particular, the words of the Swami, that the spirit of the universe dwells within the heart and in silence is loving to all, from the Upanishads. And this made him, of course, resonate with his own Christian belief of Christ dwelling in us. We are temples of the Holy Spirit. So he was very much on the wavelength of this monk. And of course, he knew of mystical prayer, but had not actually been introduced to a method. So he said to the monk, at one point in the conversation, I'm a Christian, as you know, and I would like to learn to meditate. Do you think you could teach me? So he said, sure. He said, it will make you a better Christian. So he took a Christian mantra, and the Swami said, I can help you, but only if you're serious. So what do you think he meant by that? How much? How much is it going to cost? So what do you think he meant by only if you're serious? Practice. What kind of practice?
Well, it's the same.
Yeah? Yeah, he said, if you do this morning and evening, I can teach you. Otherwise, we'll be wasting each other's time. Now, John Main was also a very disciplined person, and so he integrated this into his own prayer life and would come once a week and meditate with the Swami. And he would say, when is something going to happen? How long is this going to take? Like anybody. And the Swami would reply to every question with a smile and by saying 3 words. What do you think the 3 words were?
Yeah.
Say your mantra. Okay. So when he finished his time in Malaya, he returned to Dublin, became a professor, head of international law department, actually at a very young age, at Trinity College in Dublin. And he lived a happy life there, and was a happy person. He was the most integrated person I've ever met. And but for various reasons, including, maybe primarily at the time, the death of a nephew of his from a brain tumor who he cared for, and with his sister, this awakened in him his vocation, and he joined the Benedictine monastery of the Ealing Abbey in London. And when he decided to do this, he was looking forward to a conversation with his novice master about prayer, and he'd never really found anybody he could speak to about meditation in the way that he was now practicing it and had included in his prayer life. So he was looking forward to the conversation, but unfortunately the novice master hadn't heard of meditation in this way. So he said, well, I don't really think this is in our tradition. So he said, I think you should give that up. Mm. So in those days, monks were obedient. So he stopped meditating. And he says, in a little book called Gethsemane Talks, he said he went into an inner desert, but he said he didn't complain about it. He didn't criticize the novice master. He said when he did return to meditation, which I'll describe, he returned on God's terms, not his own. So he studied in Rome, and the Vatican during the council was very excited by the changes taking place in the church. He returned to his monastery and eventually became headmaster of a Benedictine school in Washington, D.C., St. Anselm's. And the school was in rather a lot of chaos at the time, and this was the late 60s. So everything was falling apart. The only people who got married were monks who left the monastery. Nobody else was getting married. The kids were all in chaos. So he put order back into it. And as a Benedictine monk, he believed in good order. And he was a good leader and good with people. And one day, a young American student came to see him, and he said, I've been traveling all around the world. He said, I did come to this school some years ago. I don't practice my Christian faith anymore. So I've been to the ashrams, I've been to the zendos, I've been to all the places in Asia. And he said, I've come back and I just wonder, is there anything like meditation in Christianity? So this was the beginning of a little journey for John Main that sent him back to the roots of his own Christian tradition. And in the teachings of John Cassian, 5th century monk, who was a sort of inspiration teacher of St. Benedict, in the conferences of Cassian, 9 and 10, especially on prayer, he found an understanding of prayer that revived and restored what he had learned before. And he recognized it. Perhaps if he hadn't had that earlier experience, he wouldn't have recognized it. Thousands, hundreds of thousands of monks had probably read this, but without actually realizing how practical it was meant to be understood. So when he read in Cassian, when we come to pray, the first thing we discover is how distracted and confused our minds are. And in order to bring our minds to this place of prayer, we have to let go of our thoughts. To abandon, as he says, all the riches of thought and imagination, which brings us into poverty of spirit, the first of the Beatitudes. And the method for doing this that Cassian recommends is to take a verse and to repeat it continuously in the mind and heart. Not thinking about it, but repeating it, abandoning all the riches of thought and imagination. One of the things Cassian says is that this was not easy. He followed this tradition from the Desert Fathers, but he realized it wasn't easy. But the first fruit of this practice, he said, was in his reading of Scripture. He said, the Scriptures came alive to me as if I had written them myself, or I sort of saw into the bones and marrow of their meaning. It's an experience of the living Word, directly related to this practice of non-conceptual, non-objective attention, the pure attention that John Main understood already as relating to the mantra, to the saying of the word. Cassian calls it a formula in Latin, And of course, it's the same as the Jesus prayer in the Orthodox Church, which comes from the same tradition of the desert. Well, it actually comes from the teaching of Jesus on prayer. Once you've been meditating for a while, then you look at the Sermon on the Mount and you see what Jesus says about prayer, you think, why isn't every Christian meditating? Because that is what he's teaching. What does he say? What's one of the things he says about prayer? Thank you. This hasn't been prepared. Go into your inner room. Second thing? Yes, close the door. Yes, and stay there. You close the door because you stay there. You don't just do it for 2 seconds. You stay there and you work at it. So go into your inner room, close the door, and then don't go babbling on like the pagans who think the more they say, the more likely they are to be heard. Actually, God knows what you need even before you ask. So reduce the words of your prayer life. Silence. First thing, interiority. Second, silence. Third thing, equanimity. Do not worry. Don't sit there just thinking about all your problems, all the things you want or don't want. Lay aside your worries and anxieties. Look at the birds of the air, the lilies of the field. God looks after them. So, equanimity. Next, attention. Set your mind on God's kingdom before everything else. It doesn't mean think and analyze and theologize about it at the time of meditation. He says, just set your mind on this reality of the kingdom, which is the presence of God. And then finally, well, not finally, but then he says, be in the present moment. Don't be thinking about tomorrow. Live in the present moment. So take those elements of Jesus' core teaching on prayer, interiority, silence, peace of mind, equanimity, attention, and presence, being in the present moment. What do you have? What do you have? Meditation. Well, I think that he's describing actually contemplation. As we've touched, and Jason's helped to touch us on this important distinction between the two. So he's a teacher of contemplative prayer, that's very clear. He prayed in other ways. So let's just have a quick look at the So think of prayer as a wheel, big wheels, okay? It's a good symbol of prayer because a wheel has to touch the ground. You won't get to the airport tomorrow unless the wheels of your car touch the ground. You also won't get to the airport tomorrow unless the hub of the wheel, the axle, is firm. Otherwise, you will lose control. What's that noise? So, think of an old-fashioned cartwheel with these different spokes and all of these different spokes of prayer to interfere. So all these different forms of prayer are like, so all these different spokes patience, peace, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, good. So all of these spokes of the wheel are like different forms of prayer. Inclusive. They're not competing with each other. Can I speak? Yes, they're not competing with each other. So we have Lectio, we have the sacraments, we have the devotions, we have rosary, we have pilgrimages, we have, what else do we have? What? Lectio Divina, liturgy. Okay, this whole wonderful feast of prayer that we have. Do we eat it all at the same time? No. And some people have favorites. But these are the different spokes of the wheel, different kinds of prayer that lead to the center of the wheel. Otherwise, they can't hardly be called Christian. They're Christ-centered. And what do we find at the center of the wheel of prayer? The what, say?
The hub.
The hub, yes. We find the human center, the center of integration in the human being. What else do we find in spiritual terms? Christ, stillness, be still and know that I am God. Grounding, the ground of being.
Yeah.
Unity. Who do we find there? And who is praying there?
Yeah.
Yes. So Christian prayer is our journey, in whatever form, it's our journey into the prayer of Christ. We go in him, with him, and through him to the Father in the Spirit. That's the basic theology of prayer. So, when we understand meditation, we can understand why it takes us, we may be supported by these other forms of prayer, and these other forms of prayer can also take us there, but there is a special value to the silence, stillness, and simplicity of contemplative prayer itself. Pope Francis said this in his beautiful exhortation to holiness a couple of years ago. And he said, what I'm writing about is not a theology of holiness, but I want to awaken you the desire to be holy. If you don't want it, you're not going to do it. So, and then he says at the end, and it's the holiness of ordinary people in daily life. And he says, however, everybody, the busy mother who's been working all day, or the father who's been out and been working in the office or in the fields or wherever all day, needs to take time for silence, solitude, stillness. So this dimension of prayer is essential, I think, to making the whole wheel turn. And when it turns, you understand why contemplation, which is what you have here at the center, in the temple of the mind of Christ, is the source of the motion and activity of the wheel. It's what makes the wheel turn and go somewhere and cover ground throughout our life. So contemplation and action are married in this understanding of the wheel of prayer, and which must include a type of contemplative practice, and meditation, as far as I have found anyway, is the simplest. So this is basically what we might call the essential teaching of John Main and of the community. He started meditating again in Washington. I visited him in 1970, Easter 71, because I had some problems, and I wanted to speak with him. So I went to spend Easter there at his monastery. And in one of the conversations we had, he introduced me to meditation in a very few words, in a very light touch. I wasn't expecting it, but I knew that what he was saying, it sort of imploded in my mind. I didn't understand it at all. I was at university, I was studying literature. The idea of leaving thoughts behind didn't make any sense to me. However, even though I'd been reading quite a lot in other mystical traditions, I didn't understand it when I heard it in practice. And then, but although I didn't understand it with my mind, it touched my heart, and it opened my heart in a way that had not happened before. And it also awakened in me a hunger for this. I wanted to know it. I wanted to experience it. But it was quite a few years later that I did actually get into a practice, and I needed to become a monk in order to do it, because I'm very undisciplined and a very slow learner. But of course, he realized that you didn't need to be a monk to integrate this into your spiritual life. So he came back to England in 1975 at his monastery and started a meditation center, which showed everyone just what a huge hunger and need there was in the church for a teaching. People would come and say, look, we can't come and make a long retreat here like these guys are doing. But, do we have to go to the Buddhists? Do we have to go to the TM? Nothing wrong with them, but do we have to leave home in order to find our way into meditation? So that led quite shortly to an invitation from the Archbishop of Montreal to come to Montreal, where the church was imploding, really, as it has done in Ireland and in other parts of the world, and to set up a monastery in the city devoted to the practice and the teaching of meditation in the Christian tradition. So that was the big turning point. I came with him in 1977, and we worked together with lay people who came to join, members of the lay community, and then people who were joining the monastery, to build a community, and which was open to the city and indeed to the world. In a very small scale at first, then we were given a bigger house. And John Main, then, you would have thought, we have had a good number of years ahead of him, but he didn't. So he was 56 when he died in 1982, at a point where everybody thought this is going to be, well, what a pity. It was all going so well. And I asked him before he died what I should do. And he looked at me, thought for a moment, and he said, "You'll do what you have to do." So I said, "Thank you very much." Very helpful. But that's what I tried to do. And then I realized quite soon that the seed that had been planted was spreading around the world. And then we stayed in Montreal for another few years. 1990, we set up a center in London to care for the global community. And then 1991, we came here for the John Main seminar. So there, briefly, is the story of the WCCM and the story of John Main. And the only thing I'd like to do before I finish is to say something about that we are all, if we're following this particular way. And John Main was very clear and confident in the teaching he was giving about meditation in this way. But he never said this is the only way to pray, or this is the best way to pray, or this is better than any other. He didn't have that kind of mind. He had a big mind. He had a very broad tent. So he wasn't into that kind of competition or comparison. But he was very clear about the value and the universality of this way of prayer, which at the same time, he said, is not easy. It's dead simple. Sit down, close your eyes, say your mantra twice a day, a minimum of twice a day, he said. I was talking to somebody in the washroom just this morning about that, and they said, yeah, it took me a few years to get to doing it twice a day. So it may take time. But the twice a day, the discipline of the daily practice and the discipline of the mantra during the time of the meditation, where you let go of all thoughts, words, and images, and that you stay with the same word from day to day, year to year. So it's really dead simple, and it's really a discipline. But it's the discipline of discipleship. I mean, I think what Jason was saying about discipleship struck a very deep chord in this teaching, because how do we become a disciple? Because unless we become a disciple, we will be controlled by our wandering mind and our ego. So here is a way, if this is what you feel called to, this is a discipline that will make you into a disciple without you even knowing it. And it will set you free. Discipline, the whole purpose of discipline is to set you free, not to constrain you, but to break your shackles, and the shackles of the ego and the illusions of the ego. So this is a very quick tour of the journey we make when we start meditating. So I told you that first moment when I heard about meditation, so we would all have some kind of story about that the day we begin. Sit down and say your mantra. Very easy sounding, and yet the first thing we discover is that the mind is this tree of monkeys, or with huge amounts of interference coming in from all corners. We can say the mantra for a few seconds before we start worrying about our journey home tomorrow, or what's going to happen in the future, or whatever. So many people give up here because they say, oh, it's just not for me. Or they'll say, well, I'll continue to sit here, but I'll just let my mind wander. Or I'll just use the time for Lectio. Lectio is a very valuable practice. It's indispensable to the Christian spiritual life. But it's not the same as this. So many people might give up, feeling discouraged. And what helps you? What helps to encourage you?
What?
What? The mantra itself, because it will teach you. Experience is your teacher. Community, yes. Meditating with other people. This is at the heart of the Christian understanding of meditation, that you don't just go off into the forest or a cave in the Himalayas, but you're sitting in your meditation group, in your little leaky parish office that you've got, or even online, and it's this communion with others, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, that a whole new dimension opens up. So the encouragement of meditating with others, I think, is essential to getting past this first stage, which many people, well, all of us, stop at some point and then start again. Okay, so let's say we continue meditating, saying the mantra as faithfully as we can. It will bring us to a second level of consciousness. This is a little simplistic, just totally wrong. So this is the first level of consciousness, the monkey mind. This is like the hard disk of our lives, the hard disk of everything that has happened to us, or we think has happened to us, our losses, our failures, our griefs, and our guilts, and whatever. Everything is here. Some of it is being integrated, but by no means all of it. So there are a lot of open files in our psychological and emotional history. This is where a lot of this can block us from living life to the full. I've come that you may have life in all its fullness, Jesus said. Well, a lot of what blocks us from just enjoying life instead of making it the hell that we can is concerned here. So here we reach this level, still saying the mantra. Remember, now you're learning a discipline by now. It gets easier, of course, the more you practice. And there's a great healing work being done here. It doesn't mean that you sit there thinking about all your traumas or all your sufferings or your losses or what I would like. And if you do, you let go of those thoughts at the time of meditation. It's not a time for looking in the mirror of your psyche. Sometimes these things will bubble up into the surface of consciousness and you find yourself thinking about the past, and then you deal with it. You think about it, reflect on it, talk about it. But at the time of meditation, remember, we let go of everything that comes up. Then, if we do that, we will come to the third level of consciousness, which we could call the brick wall of the ego. This is our deep sense of separation, individuality, what prevents me from entering into full union and freedom in relationship or in service or in love with others. It's something in us that blocks us. It's like the alcoholic I spoke to once who said, I'm so lucky, I have a wonderful wife, but when I get the craving for drink, all I want to do is get rid of my wife and take my bottle. So that's a very disordered ego in addiction, of course. But the ego has this, when it is not healthy, the ego is dangerous. And it locks us into our separateness and into our loneliness. So we meet this brick wall of the ego. The cloud of unknowing says we are meeting the naked awareness. What is it? The naked awareness of ourself on this side of the ego. So what do? Well, we remain faithful to the practice. And then this wall is built up of thousands of bricks, of repressions, of fears, of defenses that we've built up over the past, unconsciously even. And one day, a brick falls out of the wall. And it's like somewhere here on the grounds, there's a wall with circles in it, right? Have you seen it? So you have a thick, plain wall, but then you have a circle in the wall. You can see through it. The wall is still there, but it's no longer blocking you. So you see through it. And then more and more of these little bricks fall out. And this is where you begin to experience the fruits of meditation. Freedom, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, fidelity, gentleness, and self-control. Jesus says, take up your cross every day. Well, we take up our ego every day. We have to live with it. And eventually we hope the ego will be tamed and healed, and the ego will become a servant rather than a tyrant in our life, and a vehicle for serving others rather than trying to compete with others. That takes time, depending on how thick the wall is and how many bricks there are in it. So let's start teaching meditation to young children. Then this whole process of human development will unfold much more healthily and smoothly. And then finally, what happens? In God's own time, and in a way that we cannot observe or anticipate, we are led, the wall opens up, or we go through the wall into the Spirit. And on this side of the wall, up here, you have the sorrow of existence, every day, problems of life. But on this side of the wall, you have the joy of being. Father John says that on this side of the wall, we meet a guide. And the guide is Jesus, the risen Jesus. And so we go with Jesus in the Spirit. And where are we going? To the Father. That's the human journey. Now, does that mean Jesus didn't exist in our lives before? No. He's up here in the monkey mind as well. So we hardly hear him or see him because we're too chattering. Is he here? Yes. In the place where we need healing and integration? Yes. He is the healer. And is he here at this level of the ego, on this side of the ego wall? Yes, he's helping us. He had an ego too. Not as disordered as ours, but he had an ego, and he helps us to carry our cross. But what happens here in the Spirit is we recognize him in a new way. And this is why we can really say meditation brings us closer to and in union with the mystery of the risen Christ and the universal Christ. So there's a recognition takes place here, just as takes place in the Gospels, in the resurrection appearances, where at first they don't recognize him, or they're frightened of him, or they deny that it could possibly be him. And then the penny drops, and like when Jesus says to Mary, Mary, what does she say? Rabboni, Father, Rabboni, teacher. So this, you could say that the whole of this journey, in Christian terms, is a deepening preparation and experience of stages of recognition. And we recognize him because he recognizes us. And so this is the, basically in brief terms, this is the Christian understanding of meditation. It was at the heart of John May's experience and his teaching, and if you go to his books, his teachings, and especially to his recorded talks, I think you'll be touched by seeing from your own experience, which is a phrase he uses very often. He doesn't just want to tell you what it's like. He wants you to discover in your own experience, and that's what the whole of discipleship is about, of course. So, anyway, that's why we are here, and why we are going to continue now with Jason. Thank you. Thank you very much.